GLD, I mean, over here, interest rates were very, very low, which usually means that gold would be high. And as interest rates move up, So you definitely have on the S&P a beautiful double top right here. You can see the markets today are kind of struggling a little bit. It's not a big pullback, but it's kind of what you'd expect at a resistance point here. We did make a slightly higher high, just like Bitcoin. So now the question is, does it start trading back down just like the Bitcoin play did? This is where it gets a little trickier on the S&P 500, because going into today's move, we had lower lows and lower highs. Now we have a slightly higher high, but also a lower low. So think about it like this. When you have two of the same, the trend is very easy to analyze, right? It's in that direction. In the case of the market prior to today, it was lower lows and lower highs, so the trend had turned down. Now you have one that has flipped. Now flipping is basically a positive and a negative. So those cancel each other out, and you have to go as a technical trader into more of a neutral wait and see situation. So that's kind of where I am right now. At least on the S&P 500, I'm in a wait and see. Do we start to trade down, maybe make a lower low and a lower high again, in which case the downside starts to resume? Or do we have a shallow pullback and then make a higher high, in which case you could then say you now have higher lows and higher highs. But again, when you have one way and one the other way, they cancel each other, a positive and a negative, and you have to go more into a trading neutral stance until you get more information.
Yeah, and it's starting to shape up just like a correction, just like the rest of the trend has been so far. And I guess, expectations would be for markets to continue to go up for a while, but we're treading on thin ice, it seems like here, and more and more people are starting to talk about it.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, there's so many issues out there too, but again, the market has been resilient. It's interesting as we get later into October, into November, do we actually see the Federal Reserve start to cut back on that QE? Do they start to taper? How does the market react? A lot of people are saying the market is anticipating a $10 to $15 billion cut every month or two, starting in November or December. And the question again is, how does the market react? How do yields react? My theory is that with yields trading below that 1.75% high, the markets are kind of used to that. We were there, in April. Okay, this is kind of the same range. If we break 1.75%, everyone's going to start to panic about 2%. And that's especially where technology could see more selling to the downside.
Yeah, it's real interesting. I think, the Fed taper, that's already on the books. They're going to, I guess, confirm that in November. And it's minor. So it's not going to be significant for at least a couple of quarters before maybe 50% of that reduction is actually in place. The real key is interest rates, because inflation is well ahead of where they were thinking. And it's interesting. One of the Fed chairs came out the other day and said she's not concerned about inflation, doesn't think it's running much more than what they anticipated. But I think everybody else is realizing that inflation is, probably 10%, if not more, from an effective standpoint.
Yep, I agree 100%. And again, even the Fed is starting to admit it's not just a one and done type thing. I mean, we're going to be fighting the inflation bug into next year. That's what they're admitting now. And then I think they'll ultimately have to admit that it's going to be a longer term problem. And that doesn't mean we're going to be at 8 or 10% for multiple years. But remember, they want it at 2%. My guess is it runs hot at 5% for many years, especially with the labor costs going up. I mean, that is something that, my point is, if you're paying someone $10 an hour and you have to raise their pay to $20 an hour, you can't immediately raise a cost of a widget by that much. So you do it over the course of time so that people still will buy your widgets. You do it slowly, which then means inflation will just be consistently high for a period of time.
Yeah. And the bond purchase is one thing. The interest rates, that's the real catalyst. I think that's what we really need to keep our eyes on. I think all of the bond tapering is kind of getting priced in as we go along. The interest rates is what everybody's kind of watching. And that, I think that will do the most damage the fastest if they all of a sudden have to reverse course and start raising rates at any kind of a meaningful pace.
Yeah. I agree 100%. And I think the one thing I would say in regards to interest rates, what people should be really focused on is like the price of gold has held up remarkably well. So one thing I want to just point out here is, I've been generally someone who's a longer term, very bullish on gold. And if you look at the GLD, I mean, over here, interest rates were very, very low, which usually means that gold would be high. And as interest rates move up, usually gold fades. But what we've seen is gold's actually held choppy sideways as interest rates have soared back to this 1.7%. And I think that is a good indicator that gold is starting to anticipate the inflationary thing, which again is a longer term bullish thesis for the gold price. So again, I continue to be very positive on gold, even though it honestly hasn't done a whole lot over the last 6 months or so. It to me is pricing in, or it's starting to show us what we want to see in terms of interest rates going up because of inflation is actually a bullish case for the gold price.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and obviously Bitcoin and cryptos have stolen a lot of liquidity from the gold markets.
Yeah, it really has. There's no doubt about it. What'll also be interesting if we start to see kind of a bearish tendency to come into Bitcoin. Does money rotate into gold, or is that money kind of the quick profit money that might overlook gold in terms of saying, oh, well, maybe gold goes up 10-20%, but I want the next hit of 50% in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And, with the crypto cycle, the way the money rolls, obviously Bitcoin, then Ethereum, then large cap, then small cap, that's kind of been the rotation in the market. Bitcoin tops, shortly after that, Ethereum tops, then large caps, then small caps. We're kind of seeing that in a small way right now. When Bitcoin's momentum, tapers off, some of the other coins are running, not the entire altcoin market yet, so we haven't seen that alt season like everybody's looking for, but it'll be interesting when that does occur, and if we're starting that process now, and a lot of it depends on what Bitcoin ends up doing.
Yeah, so true. And you're right about that. I mean, like Cardano really hasn't run. I was posting a chart today about how it's just basically holding in a wedge pattern. It hasn't broken out. It hasn't broken down. But then if you look at Solana's almost back to the all-time highs that it was at, not too far back. So yeah, it's a very selective crypto market right now, which, I'm trying to read that. Is that a bullish thing or a bearish thing? The fact that money isn't just pouring into anything, does that mean that the trend is not as strong for crypto? And again, it's something that I'm just continuing to watch.
Well, in the past, it was all of them. So you could throw money at anything and just boom, everything went up. Now, here, it's just one or two here or there. Sometimes the same ones over and over. They rip up to all-time highs and then they drop back down 50%. Then they go back up, 25 or 30, then they drop. So it's really interesting to try to, figure it out. And really it's with the Bitcoin run. As Bitcoin goes up, some of those will go down, but some will run with it. So it's really interesting. But if Bitcoin really, really decides to go down, everything's going down. Almost nothing else will run. And, we're not really seeing anything meaningful in Bitcoin right now. It's just your typical, little retracement, put in a higher low, and then, continue marching on. The question will be how far and how fast. And, I told you about the Plan B stock to flow model. I don't know if you've studied that, but price seems to be following that pretty good.
Mm-hmm. What was the October high projection from him?
63 was the floor. 63 was the floor. And I don't think anybody's looking at his, top end of the spectrum these days, because it hasn't even come close. I think we're supposed to be well over 100 right now on the mid level to top level of his stock to flow model. But 63 is what he's projecting for a close this month. 98, I think it is next month, and 123 or something like that by the end of the year.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating come the end of the month. We're only about a week away now to see where it does. Does it creep back up to 63 by then? I mean, it very well could. It's close enough. We know that. But then the other question I would have is, so many people are basing their decisions off of it. If this is the first month in X amount of months where it doesn't, does that create an added sell pressure to Bitcoin? I don't know.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. So the question is he that good, or are, the manipulators using the model to, bait people? So it really doesn't matter. And the thing about manipulation, I mean, all markets are manipulated. The key is to be able to spot it, understand it, and roll with it. And I mean, that's me. I'm an opportunistic investor. I'm not a chartist. I'm not a technical analyst. I look for the lows and buy low and sell high, and I'm in and out,
I always say I like, I admittedly am the feeder fish that attach themselves to like the great white shark. The great white shark is the Goldman Sachs, the JPMs that are making billions and billions of dollars. I'm okay with their scraps because it means millions to me, like we don't have to we just follow them and let them attack and kind of do their thing. And we'll just take the scraps along the way. And that's more than enough for me.